Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, do you find certain foods addictive? Like once you start, you just can't stop? Well, Michael Moss, New York Times investigative reporter and author of the gripping new book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us, joins us to explain why. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for all your live feedback. All right, Malika, I think all of us have experienced this at least once. You open the bag of chips, you intend to eat a few, and then the next thing you know, the bag is empty.
Once, twice, more than a few times.
10.
It's definitely happened to me. The bag's empty and you're still hungry. That's often what
I hate
happens.
that. That's the worst part.
It is the worst part. And our community is saying, you know what? It's all mind over matter. Zainab tweets, fast food advertising is a problem. If a healthy lifestyle was advertised, things would be different. So for those of you at home, if you agree or want to add in your own thoughts, please do use the hashtag AJStream.
All right, as promised, New York Times award-winning reporter Michael Moss is joining us live from New York. In 2010, he won the Pulitzer Prize for his investigation of contaminated meat. His latest work is his recently published book, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us, where he exposes American food industry tactics that encourage obesity. Michael, welcome to the stream. We're really looking forward to this discussion.
Nice to be with you.
And with us in studio is Joe Gonzalez, a dietitian and nutrition expert at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. Joe, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We'd also like to welcome our Google Plus Hangout panel. They're going to be posing questions and comments to our guests today in just a moment. Of course, you can do the same in future Hangouts. Just make sure you go to the link below and add us to your circles so you can be in the stream.
Hi, I'm Faz Ahmad, and I like waffle cones, and I'm in the stream.
A lot of money is invested into the science of manufacturing irresistible food. Food giants put serious work into finding out how we are attracted to certain products. Their goal? Well, they want us to eat more of what they make. Take a look at cheese, for example.
Every year, the average American eats as much as 33 pounds of cheese. That's up to 60,000 calories and 3,100 grams of saturated fat. So why do we eat so much cheese? Mainly it's because the government is in cahoots with the processed food industry. And instead of responding in earnest to the health crisis, they've spent the past 30 years getting people to eat more. This is the story of how we ended up doing just that.
So for decades, large food companies have known that consuming large amounts of salt, sugar, and fat is bad for our health. Yet they've turned to these ingredients to make their products impossible to resist. Through sophisticated science, companies are finding what's called the optimal bliss point of sugary and salty snacks, or the mouthfeel of fat, to keep us hooked. The result? A fast and easy American diet characterized by calorie-dense products, all of which play a major role in the country's rising obesity rates. So today we examine the processed foods industrial complex by taking a tour of the secretive and highly competitive world of manufacturing irresistible food. Michael, your book is an incredible work of investigative journalism. Basically, you leveraged a massive amount of internal food industry documents that you obtained to get insiders to talk to you. Talk about what you discovered in terms of how the food giants calculate every move to create essentially addiction to their products and increase their profits.
Well, yes. I mean, the records basically allowed me to put the readers at the table inside these companies as they're planning, plotting, and formulating their way to creating new products. And really the driving force in that is not to make us just like their products, but to make us want more and more. And with those documents in hand, I was able to get some of the leading, most important scientists and marketing people within these companies to open up and tell me more secrets. So for example, I spent time with a legend in the industry named Howard Moskowitz, who has invented some of the greatest icons in the grocery store that we're now eating. He walked me through his recent invention, he calls it engineering, of a new flavor of soda for Dr. Pepper to arrive at the perfect optimum amount of sweetness. He started with 61 different formulas, each slightly varying from the next one, subjected those to some 3,000 consumer taste tests, put the data into his computer, did his high math regression analysis thing. He's trained at Harvard, and then came up with the very precise amount of sugar. Your viewers can do this experiment themselves. If they like sugar in coffee, just keep adding a little bit more until you reach the optimum point. Keep adding more and you'll suddenly go, yuck, this is too much. The reason is because we actually have a limit for how much sugar we like. It's a bell-shaped curve, and at the top is what the industry has called the bliss point. Not too much, not too little, perfect amount to send us over the moon and their products flying off the shelf. It's not just soda though, and one of the important things to realize here is that food throughout the grocery store has been made sweeter and sweeter, from bread to pasta sauce to yogurt, all with bliss points engineered perfectly to make us crazy for it.
But we're not just talking about sugar as part of the bliss equation here. Talk about what you call the unholy trinity.
Well, you've got sugar, you've got fat. Let's talk about fat. In some ways, fat is even more powerful to the industry than sugar. It has twice as many calories. It's not actually one of the basic tastes that Aristotle first identified a long time ago. It's a sensation. There's a nerve ending that comes down to the almost to the roof of your mouth that picks up. It's the warm, gooey sensation of biting into a toasted cheese sandwich. The industry calls this the mouth feel. And one of the powerful things about fat to it is that when it's not visible to the eye, the brain has difficulty picking it up. And so you can load foods with fat, and as long as it's not visible or it's in solid form, which is quite often the saturated fat, which is the fat that's linked to heart disease, the brain is not going to put on the brakes and send those signals to you, hey Michael, you're getting too much of this, slow down.
So, Joe, I want to bring you in here. A lot of this, I think people are thinking, well, it's consumers' responsibility, right? You know what's good, you know what's bad, just don't eat it. Is that oversimplifying this problem?
It's absolutely oversimplifying the problem. As Michael points out, these foods are designed to keep us addicted and keep us coming back for more. So there's obviously responsibility everywhere. And as a dietitian, I hate to put blame on anybody because guilt just brings more explosion into this obesity epidemic. What we need to do is work together. So there's definitely a role of the consumer to be responsible and find good products, but it's very, very difficult nowadays to do that with all this new crazy research that these industries are creating and crazy food products.
There's
that
an
are keeping
addictive
us
quality
stuck.
to it. I guess the consumers are at a bit of a disadvantage.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, there's research there, but there's so much of it there that people don't even know what really to look at. Ephesi on Twitter says people must be informed about the health risk of fast foods for the culture to be reversed, and so hopefully this is the first step in that reform. But I want to go to our Google Plus Hangout now, where Yasmin Khan has a question for Michael. Yasmin is a student in the UK. Go ahead, Yasmin.
Hi, Michael. I was just wondering if we have a whistleblower to thank for the trove of documents that you used in order to get access to corporate CEOs and food industry insiders.
Actually, we don't, Yasmin. These documents come from none other than the litigation filed by states' attorneys generals against the tobacco industry. And what was amazing in this situation is that Philip Morris, the largest tobacco company, became the largest food manufacturer in North America through its acquisition of the old food giant General Foods and then Kraft, and through the 80s, and held the companies through the 80s and 90s into the 2000s. And when these records were obtained by the state attorneys general, they were looking for tobacco stuff, but in the mix were memos, letters, strategy papers, meeting minutes of the food officials meeting with Philip Morris, and that nobody had really looked at those before. That's what opened the door for me. It's an extraordinary trove that's publicly available, archived by the San Francisco University.
Michael, did I read that there were something like 80 million pages of documents?
There are, and presumably most of them are tobacco related, but within those I found thousands and thousands of pages that are just, I felt like I was inside a detective story researching and writing this book.
I'm sure there was more than one thing, but if you had to choose what one of the most shocking pieces of information was that you retrieved from all those documents, what would it be?
I loved how one of the most important things, what it disclosed to me, this amazing meeting that happened in 1999, the CEOs of some of the largest food companies in the country got together privately at the old Pillsbury headquarters in Minneapolis to consider the emerging obesity crisis. This is back in 99 when it was much smaller than it is now. And nobody but one of their own gets up before them, a gentleman named Michael Mudd, a senior executive at Kraft. He's armed with 114 slides, and he step by step lays the obesity crisis at their feet, holding them accountable and saying, look, we're even losing our friends in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it's just a matter of time before the attorneys who went after big tobacco come after us. And he pleads with them to collectively start doing the right thing, to turn a corner on behalf of consumers. It's an extraordinary moment in time.
And you mentioned that, well, we know from reading the book that he gets pushed back and nothing ever happens. But what did you come across in terms of people within the industry, insiders who have maybe pushed back, seeing the research, seeing the data and saying, look, guys, we've got some culpability here. What happens to those folks?
Yeah, I was really struck by how many senior officials I met who have left the industry, or in some cases they're still there, who have regret over what they did. I mean, in some cases, look, they invented these projects, engineered them in a more innocent era, the 70s, when our dependence on some of these foods wasn't as deep as it is today. They were seen more as a snack item. Today, and within their companies, in any number of companies, there have been cobbles of insiders who have tried to turn things around. Kraft, hats off to them. 2003, they launched an anti-obesity effort. They cut back on their marketing of sweet, the most sugary foods to children. They look at the packaging disclosures and decide they can be more forthright and honest with officials by actually disclosing how much is in the entire package, not just a tiny serving, knowing that so many people will eat the whole package. And then they do the most amazing thing, which is they tell their scientists, look, we're going to put limits on the amount of salt, sugar, fat, calories you can put into your new products, just on the chance that we are even subliminally encouraging people to eat too much. The problem is that anytime one of these companies tries to go out on their own to do the right thing, there is Wall Street breathing down their necks. There's fierce competition. The other companies will step in to try to grab that space on the grocery shelf. Wall Street, if you're sales flag, they will cough and you will have to reverse course. And this has happened time and time again.
Well, it's that competition that one of our guests in our Hangout, Sarah Davis, writes about in her blog, Scenes of Eating. And Sarah, one of the things that I picked up from your blog in your reading of Michael Moss's book was questioning the word addictive. We've talked about the bliss point, but you want to know whether or not necessarily that means this food is addictive. Safia tweets in response to a line in your blog post. She says, using the word addiction seems to reduce personal responsibility and implies lack of control over choice. Sarah, I'd like your thoughts on all of that.
Right. Well, I should say, first of all, I really enjoyed Michael's research. I thought it was very well written and very thorough. But for me, the most compelling parts of it were the stories about the many reasons why people would choose to buy junk food, convenience foods, highly processed foods. For example, the Lunchables just flying off the shelves because of parents not having time to prepare food and children wanting to have a little bit more autonomy in their lunchtime choices. So, Michael, my question for you is whether your research gave you any insight into this niche marketing, how food advocates might use those same channels to make nutritious food just as affordable and accessible as the junk food is.
One of my favorite characters in the book is the former president of Coca-Cola for North America, Latin America. He was one of their fiercest warriors for 20 years. He walked me through their targeting of children, their pioneering of the supersize me phenomena. They're calling their best customers heavy users, people who are drinking as many as 3 cans of Coke a day or more. He left eventually after having a complete change of heart about what he was doing. And I caught up with him recently. He is managing a baby carrot farm out of California. But here's what's really interesting. His strategy is to steal a page from the marketing playbook of the snack food industry and try to use the powerful tools that they use to market ultra-processed foods to market baby carrots. And that's such a fascinating concept because, as Joe mentioned before, the dairy industry doesn't just have a little more money for marketing, they have a ton more marketing. And the blueberry industry and the other fresh fruits and vegetables have literally none. So when you walk into the grocery store, all of that energy, all of that marketing, all of that federal subsidy is directed at the middle part of the grocery store with the processed foods, and almost none of it to the margins, where we all know, we're all told we should be spending more time and eating more.
Jay, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. And here in America, we subsidize the most unhealthful foods that are not meant to be in the body, and a lot of it is these highly processed foods full of sugar, salt, and fat, and a lot deals with what I mentioned, dairy products and cheese. The amount of cheese that we eat in this country is ridiculous, and the amount of meat, especially processed meat, which by the way is linked to colorectal cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and everything under the sun that we suffer from here in our country and now others. So what we definitely need is more focus on kind of leveling the playing field with our subsidies, maybe even stopping subsidies altogether, but more so leveling that playing field so that the foods that are most healthful, like the fruits and vegetables, can actually have a voice in this. And it's interesting because in the United States, we have dietary guidelines for Americans. They come out every 5 years. In these guidelines, they say eat more fruits, eat more vegetables, cut down on saturated fats and solid fats, which are found in mostly animal products. But we're not doing anything to educate the public about this. We're saying to eat these foods, but we don't give them the education on why to do it. So the science is not matching up with the nutritional recommendations that we have here in the States.
So, Michael, you know, the U.S. government, as you and Joe have both talked about, has played an enormous role in subsidizing and promoting the dairy industry and the meat industry. Who's going to advocate for consumers? I mean, most consumers think they can depend on government. Clearly, I mean, in the piece we showed from you at the beginning of the show, government, in your words, is in cahoots with industry. What are consumers to do?
There are some terrific consumer advocacy groups out there. I think to some extent, if there's going to be pressure on the government to actually step in and do some meaningful intervention, it may come from those. But I think it's going to have to come from consumers too. I think people are going to have to get louder about their growing concern about what we put in our bodies, and act on those concerns with what they buy in the grocery stores. And the companies will get the message. They are so sensitive to sales that if sales go down just a bit on the most highly problematic foods, they will notice that and put more effort into creating truly healthful products.
But how about, let's look at Lunchables, because you talk about that a lot in the book. I mean, they were so heavily marketed and continue to be.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think Jeffrey Dunn from Coca-Cola has the right notion. If advocates of fresh fruits and vegetables can come up with some of the marketing strategy that is used on the processed foods, and the question is who's going to pay for that? But there you could see some meaningful government intervention. Then you're going to see the playing field level, so that we can walk in the store and we're not going to get hit in the pocketbook by trying to shop more healthfully.
You know, it's interesting that that's mentioned because when I was younger, I would beg my parents for Lunchables because they were marketed so well. Maybe if carrots had been marketed in that same way, I would have been asking for that. But there are steps that are being taken. Mohammed Hamish says New York ban on supersized cola was a government step for promoting healthy food, and Mrs. Obama, First Lady, has campaigns for healthy foods in schools. So things are happening, but I want to go to our hangout now to speak to Yoni Friedhoff. And Yoni, you have a question, and as you're speaking, I want to pull up your blog. You're the author of the blog Weighty Matters, and you have a post, "What did you expect? Coca-Cola's newest anti-obesity ad blames chairs, not Coke." Yoni, go ahead.
Hi, Michael. Thanks so much. I just came back from New Orleans, actually, where I was part of an American Heart Association debate with the former CEO of Health for PepsiCo. And what we were debating was whether or not the food industry was a friend or a foe. And I guess my question is, through your experiences in speaking with the industry players and reading through the documents you read through, do you feel that the food industry could resist using partnerships with health organizations to polish their brands, improve, their image, to stifle legislation that's negative? Can they really play a constructive role? And I guess taking that a bit further, would less horrible products really be something that was useful? Or if we make less horrible products, because people talk about healthier, I think oftentimes they're just less bad, is that getting us out of the woods? Shouldn't we be focusing more on produce and less on products? And can the food industry really partner?
I think that's a really good question, and I've been talking to Michael Pollan, for example, just about that very notion. I mean, look, I actually don't see the processed food industry as this evil empire that intentionally set out to get us obese or otherwise ill. And they can also argue that, look, none of our products individually can be blamed for the obesity crisis. The problem lies in their collective zeal to do what companies do, which is to make as much money as possible by selling as much product as possible. And it lies in their incredible dependence on salt, sugar, fat to provide the convenience, the low cost, and the taste of their products. I was most struck by that, by how they are hooked on salt, sugar, fat even more than we are. And that's a real question. Can they truly meaningfully dial down or really alter the structure of their foods in a way that will make them meaningfully healthy? Because over the years, they've had a pattern of deny there's a problem, we're responsible for it, delay regulation, and then give in just enough to appease the critics. And you can kind of see that sugar was an issue in the 80s and fat in the 90s, and salt became an issue. And that's one of the concerns going forward here is, will they just do as little as possible to make everybody go away and sales continue, or can they be engaged in a meaningful way to restructure their foods, maybe from the bottom up?
Hemi in our Hangout has a question. Hemi is the CEO of Fooducate out of New York. And that's an app that I downloaded not too long ago, letting us know what's in our foods. We'll talk about that in the post show. But Hemi, go ahead with your question.
Hi, thanks for having me here. Is there any reason to be optimistic? I have young kids, and I'd really like for the world to be a healthier place for them to eat in 10, 20 years. Do you see the food industry changing? Do you see government regulation becoming a little more serious? Do you see the Farm Bill going to change?
Yeah, I have two boys, 8 and 13 myself, and I can talk about them. I think we're at a tipping point. I think consumers care more and more, and they're getting louder and louder. Hats off to Michelle Obama for making it part of the conversation. I know that her team of people is looking for ways to press the industry to make meaningful change. These are companies, they will respond when their profit margins get hammered if people start making other choices. In the short term, we've begun to engage our two boys because they don't get home economics and food education in the school anymore like they used to. And we're talking to them. So for example, Eve, my wife, the other day said to him, look guys, let's try to limit our cereal to brands that have 5 grams or less sugar per serving. And we go shopping now, it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt for them. They go in and pick up the box and look at the label and try to find those brands. And sure enough, they typically have to reach low, or I have to reach high to find those brands that have less sugar, because the loaded ones are strategically placed at eye level. But long term, that's certainly the hope, is when you engage kids, they're smart. They don't want to be overweight or otherwise ill, and they get it. And if we can find ways to educate them, that's going to be the long-term solution.
Perfect note to end the main portion of our show. Michael Moss, Joseph Gonzalez are going to stick around because we're going to have much more to talk about in our post show, which is coming up on streamed.aljazeera.com. So we're going to see you there in about 15 seconds. Welcome to the Online Post Show. I want to pick up on the theme we left off with Michael Moss. We were talking about how important it is to educate kids in terms of nutrition and how to navigate the grocery store, not just for kids, but for adults as well. And Malika, we've got a video comment that sort of plays right into that.
Exactly, on kids. Have a listen to this, Michael.
Hi, Michael. I'm Robin Shreves. I write for Mother Nature Network about organic foods and feeding my family. And I've been feeding my family this way for about 6 years because I decided I wanted to know what ingredients were going into their bodies, so we cut out the processed foods. But now both of my boys are in middle school and they pass a mini mart on their way from school and have started buying chips and soda with their own money. And what tips do you have to discourage them from doing this without outright forbidding them, because that doesn't work?
So Michael, forbidding them doesn't work, and you just talked about going to the grocery store with your own kids. How do you counter the power of marketing, the power of looking at that pack of Oreos and having your kids scream and say, I want that?
Yeah, we find we can't forbid because they will go for it behind your back. And boy, you're so right. These corner stores, I spent time in a neighborhood in Philadelphia. It used to fight crack houses, and parents are now fighting the corner stores because they're hurting their kids, almost as much as drugs used to, their elder siblings. It's just amazing the fare that these kids can walk in for $1 and come out with 350 empty calories of sugar, fat, and salt that'll just, destroy their ability to pay attention in the classroom. They'll have it, on the way to class in the morning. Again, kind of engaging with the kids. My 8-year-old came home the other day and said, look, Dad, all my friends get a Capri Sun for lunch, every day. And, hats off for Kraft for taking the sugar load down somewhat in those, but there's still 16 grams of sugar in those little pouches. And then he said, I don't want one every day, but just every now and then would be great. So we give him one like once every couple of weeks, and I noticed that he'll keep the empty pouch after he's drunk it on kind of the outer part of his lunch box as sort of his badge of being, not an outcast. And the peer pressure is huge. And you got to realize, you give your kids fresh carrots and apple slices, they're not going to eat them unless you talk to them about it. So education is huge.
Joe, Michael brings up an important point in these lower income communities particularly. There's a huge challenge there because junk food costs less than healthy food.
Yeah.
So, how is it that a fast food burger is less than a bag of carrots?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and that's one of the problems that we face. Let me just jump in on one of Michael's comments, and that is, education is just key. A lot of us, especially our kids, don't know where food comes from. They're not exposed to gardens. We're not even exposed to gardens as adults. So we really need to let them know where the food is coming from, finding a community garden, working with the soil, working with their hands, and especially when we think about animal products and dairy production, our kids, they don't need to be freaked out about it, but they need to know where these foods are coming from. And with the right education from our parents and our teachers and everybody else, then they can make those decisions when they're at their corner store. Yeah. But getting to your question about how are we going to fight these low-income families in places where availability of food is not that prevalent and the cost of it is so high, especially for the fresh fruits, that involves challenges across the board. But I have to say, even those little convenience stores, they do have dried beans and rice, some fruits and vegetables. A lot of it comes in the form of canned and perhaps frozen, hopefully frozen, but even the canned fruits and vegetables, and again the beans and the rice, are available at those stores. So it takes the education. Why are you going to buy them? How are you going to cook them? How are you going to flavor them up so they're not full of fat and salt, so that everybody can have a more balanced diet?
Michael, did you find that truth in labeling was a big issue?
Well, truth in labeling, look, it wasn't until the 90s that the FDA required companies to disclose how much salt, sugar, fat they're putting into these products. So, yes, that was a big improvement. But even this notion of sort of splashing the total calories on the front of soda bottles, which some companies have begun talking about doing and are doing. So many kids don't know what a calorie is, just don't have, or for adults for that matter, have a concept of how that could fit into your overall diet. So just merely putting the information on packages, especially when the touting on the front of the package in the big lettering can be so misleading, low-fat yogurt, and then you turn to the fine print and realize it has as much sugar as a similar serving of ice cream. is very problematic for shoppers, even those among us who think we're smart and we're doing the right thing.
Well, Yoni, I know you have a follow-up and you're dying to get in. Go ahead, Yoni.
Yeah, actually, it fits right in with that point regarding labeling. So I think that we are, a very unlevel playing field exists right now for consumers. And while I appreciate the role of education, my job is to educate, I do wonder whether if we just talk about education, it would be like talking about a floodplain and only talking about swimming lessons. You know, we need to build levees as well. And I'm wondering, Michael, what your thoughts are on the government's role in doing things like nutrition fact panel reforms, you know, sugar-sweetened beverage taxes, the cup size ban that was proposed by Bloomberg. Aren't those the sorts of things that will help in fueling and leading consumers to be able to utilize their swimming lessons?
And I'm just struck by how in so many ways the processed food industry, a $1 trillion industry, is more powerful than the agencies that are supposedly there to regulate it and protect us. Look, one of the gaping holes on the nutrition fact box on products is the sugar line. They'll tell you how much sugar is in there, but they won't tell you how much was natural, how much was added, and they also won't give you a recommended daily maximum for sugar. Total guesswork on your part. That's a huge hole in the disclosure that's there right now. And absolutely, every time federal agencies or the mayor of New York take some action or talk about taking some action, the industry is there pushing back really, really hard. And again, I can't help but think it's going to, you know, government officials are incredibly risk averse. They're not going to do anything unless they're forced to. And the only thing in this equation that's going to force them to is consumers and consumer advocates.
Well, Joe, you know, it's interesting that he just said that the government's not going to do anything unless they're forced. Recently, and we have a web exclusive on our website, stream.aljazeera.com, about this anger over the Monsanto Protection Act. The bill protecting genetically modified food has slipped under the radar. It was just passed by Barack Obama. He signed it into law. There's anger about these genetically modified foods. And then we see this tweet from Abasa who says, if with GMOs there's 1 billion people underfed, what would be the case if GMOs were thrown away? So even we have these, you know, genetically modified foods.
Sure.
We have overweight people in the US. We have people starving all around the world. What would be the case if we didn't have them?
Well, that's a really good question, and that's how Monsanto and these GMO companies use that tactic to say, hey, we need these foods to feed the world, but that's just not the case. We can grow foods without GMOs. They're doing it in Europe. They're doing it in other places. We need to take a lesson from them here in the U.S. and start mass producing these really healthful foods. We don't need labels. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of packaged foods out there. This is the point of the discussion, but we don't need food that comes with labels. We can get our food from whole sources, and that's what we should be feeding the entire populations who are starving out there. Again, grains, very important. They should not be all fed to cattle and livestock. If we were to consume them directly, we could do a lot better off.
And if it does have a label, we should have the right to know what's in it.
Precisely.
Yes, of course.
Right. I want to go to Hemi now.
Seems like such a no-brainer, right?
It does seem like a no-brainer. We teased this in the main show, Hemi, your app, Fooducate. Let us know what it is and what it does.
So Fooducate helps people and kids too. Michael, you can download this app for your children.
Great.
You go to the supermarket or at home, and basically what you can do is scan the barcode of a product with the app, and it instantly shows you the information you need in order to make a decision. It shows a letter grade, A, B, C, or D. It then shows a few brief bullet point explanations about the pros and cons. And lastly, it recommends healthier alternatives. So when it comes to sugar, it explains that 16 grams is actually 4 teaspoons full. When it comes to trans fat that sometimes appears as 0, it explains that partially hydrogenated oil in small amounts still could lead to trans fat in a product. And basically, the app helps people make smarter choices by leading them to less processed foods.
Michael, I'm still not sure how we're going to get around the whole marketing issue here. I was just thinking about Yoplait and yogurt in general and how it's been marketed as such a healthy food. And really, when you read the labels, you get the feeling that it's not all that healthy, yet people, particularly women, just buy it in droves.
There's another shimmer of health out there with fruit. So many products have the word fruit splashed on the front of their labels, and when you turn it around, you realize what they're talking about is fruit concentrate, which in the extreme form can be something called stripped fruit, which is basically just another form of sugar. The fiber is gone, the bulk of the fresh fruit is gone, which makes fresh fruit so healthy. So yeah, I mean, you're going to continue to have the industry looking for every way it possibly can to market its foods, and they're so good at that. And what can I say? I mean, apps like Fooducate, are so important too, in the sense that the supermarket is not a static place. And one thing I like to develop for myself are some shopping habits, so I can cut down on the amount of time I spend in the grocery store. I have a list, at least in my head, of those things I like to buy, but those things are changing kind of all the time. 60,000 products in the larger supermarkets, and they're evolving. So it doesn't really look like it did the last few months ago, and that makes it even more difficult for consumers.
And speaking of difficult, we teased this a little bit earlier, mentioned this. Osmond says, I always see junk food on sale. Seldom do I see the same for healthy food. How do we change that? And you were mentioning solutions. Someone tweets in that community gardens are one solution, but what are some other ones, Joe?
Yeah, some other solution, again, it comes down to education, for our government to step in, hopefully they will, and for public policy to step in. And really what we're doing as a nonprofit, as the Physicians Committee, is something great. We have a lot of materials available for different communities around the world, one of them being our Kickstart program, where folks can go and learn about what foods to buy at the store. We give them a shopping list, we give them recipes, and we let them know how inexpensive it is for them to go out and make these choices. We also run our own clinical research, where I do grocery store tours for some of our participants. So there's a lot of ways to do this, and I think, again, we all just need to work together, stop putting the blame on all these companies and all these industries, and really just get back to eating whole natural foods the best way we can.
Michael, I want to wrap up the show. A lot of reasons to feel overwhelmed and a bit helpless here. Help us end this on a positive note. What are you optimistic about?
Well, again, just coming to my own life, when I walk in the door of the grocery store, I realize, having done the research and the writing for the book, that they're doing everything they can to make a spontaneous decision. So you'll see the soda cooler at the checkout counter. Make a list and stick to it. Work those outer margins of the store where the fresh fruits and vegetables are, and the less processed meats and dairy, if that's what you eat. Be really wary when you get to the center part of the store, especially the middle parts of the aisle at eye level. They've done research where they put devices on people's heads to monitor their eye movements, and they know that when we enter the aisle, our eyes go to those center sections. Look low, look high for the plain oatmeal and things that are less processed, that don't sell as well, but in a good grocery store, they will be there. And talk to your kids. I mean, make food, to the extent you can in your busy life, make it a bigger part of your life. I've started making my own pasta sauce because commercial sauces on the shelf can be so sweet, as sweet as cookies. And I found that it's really not that hard to throw some garlic and some olive oil and add a can or a box of plain chopped tomatoes and whatever spices are in the cabinet. And I'm talking to my kids, and 5 minutes later, we've got a sauce that we've made that's part of our meal. And it's sort of moving from mindlessness to mindfulness on food.
Michael Moss, Joseph Gonzalez, fascinating discussion today. Thank you both for being here so much. Now on Monday's program, autism awareness is increasing around the world, but you may be surprised to hear that while the U.S. is a leader in research, it is far behind in action. So send us your comments and your questions on that, and until then, we'll see you online.